Happy New Year. Welcome to TVBS Meeting Room, where we tackle global issues with a view from Taiwan. I'm your host, Wenqi Yu. Just a few years ago, most people had never heard of the word semiconductor. But as geopolitical tensions rise, who will control the most critical technology, such as semiconductors, has drawn intense discussions in Washington, D.C. and beyond. Today, in the first episode of 2023, we're pleased to have Chris Miller, author of a hugely popular new book, Chip War, The Fight for the World's Most Critical Technology, and Philip Young, and former Deputy Secretary General of Taiwan's National Security Council with us to talk about chips, not potato chips, but the chips that power just about everything we use in today's modern world. So welcome, Chris and Philip.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Wenqi. And hello, Chris.
So Chris, first of all, congratulations on winning the Financial Times Best Business Book of the Year. The book recounts the history of silicon chips in the post-Cold War era. Most people probably have no idea, over the last few decades, how intertwined the developments of Silicon Valley, the US defense industry, and Taiwan's semiconductor industry are. Can you give our audience a high-level review of that history and why it matters today?
Well, the first chips were only invented just over 60 years ago in the United States. And since then, the entire world has come to rely on these tiny pieces of silicon for the functioning of almost all aspects of our economy and society. Today, the typical person will rely on hundreds or thousands of chips over the course of their daily life, in their smartphone and data centers and their automobile, without ever seeing a single one of them because they're all packaged deep inside devices. But society won't work without them. And the most advanced chips today are produced with a very complex international supply chain stretching from Europe, United States, Japan to Taiwan. And today in Taiwan, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, is the world's largest chip maker and also the producer of the world's most advanced processor chips, which gives Taiwan a position of unique importance in the production of the computing power that the rest of the world depends on.
Well, so since you mentioned Taiwan, we have to come to Philip. According to Chris' book, the rise of Taiwan's semiconductor industry was part of the government's strategy to ensure sustained U.S. attention to Taiwan after the war in Vietnam. So, for example, the famous Minister of Economic Affairs, KT Lee Guoding, welcomed Texas Instruments to invest in Taiwan in the 1960s. And later, the government supported the founding of TSMC and a number of other companies through sovereign investment and set up the Hsinchu Science Park, Hsinchu 科学园区, to provide an ecosystem that would attract Taiwanese engineers who study in the US and worked in the Silicon Valley. So can you share that brief history from Taiwan's perspective, in particular, how Taiwanese government, its strategic thinking regarding Taiwan's economic competitiveness and importance in the global economy?
Well, Wenqi, you have to go back all the way to February 14, 1974. I think in the breakfast restaurant, where most of the very influential economic and financial bureaucrats, officials met under the order of President Jiang Jingguo to find a new path for Taiwan's economic transformation for the next phase of economic development. And they decided that semiconductor, of course, with the cooperation with the RCA, and will be the right way to do. And then, in fact, actually, during the Cold War, actually, many Taiwanese students went to the United States and other places to learn the advanced technology, and also allowing them to come back and to contribute their ability and to the economic development in Taiwan. And so, among them, Zhang Zhongmo of TSMC was
Morris
invited.
Chang.
Morris Chang invited to come back in 1987 and to found TSMC. At that time, Taiwan government actually has a 40% of the investment of the company. And so in year of 1993, I went to the stock market. as long as from day one that Morris Chang was the man behind the TSMC until his retirement. So, but all the way the Taiwanese government actually have a strong and vigorous support of the semiconductor industries with a lot of subsidies. Yeah.
Yeah. Why did they decide on semiconductor? Was there, 20, 30 years ago or 40 years ago, did people understand the importance of semiconductor, or that was just kind of an opportunity?
That was a bit of everything, but I think most of it because the vision and also the position of Taiwan's in the International Division of Labor, particularly in the semiconductor industries, make them understand that this is Taiwan's chance to be part of it and to have a major share of it. And also together with the Taiwanese investment and Morris Chang's leadership, of course, and of course, don't forget USC, UMC. So that's probably because of
and UNC is, can you say the United?
UMC is a Liandian, yeah.
Yeah.
He's probably number 3 after TSMC and Samsung. Yeah.
So, I think while the world is currently focused on the competition for most advanced chip making technologies and capabilities, the world used to collaborate on chip making and manufacturing, including with China. In fact, many Taiwanese semiconductor companies have factories in China. And the semiconductor industry is a huge global supply chain. So, Chris, it would be interesting for you to kind of share with our audience how each country has played a different role, from the United States, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, Malaysia, to today, the Netherlands and beyond. And Philip, I'd like you to share maybe more about how Taiwan and China used to, and to a certain extent, still collaborate in manufacturing semiconductors.
Well, to start with, the shape of the supply chain today depends a bit on which types of chips we're talking about, because of course, not all chips are the same. There are big differences between processor chips and memory chips. But if you take the most advanced processor chips, what you'll find is that producing them requires software, materials, machine tools, and expertise from a half dozen different countries. The tools that are used to make semiconductors are sourced primarily from the US, Japan, and the Netherlands. The software that designs chips is largely coming from the US. Many of the materials and chemicals that go into advanced chips come from Japan. And then, as we mentioned previously, TSMC has the world's most advanced capabilities at producing chips using all of these other inputs that I discussed. And then finally, chips are packaged and tested and eventually assembled into final devices, which often takes place in Southeast Asia or in China. And so the typical chip will have inputs from at least a half dozen different countries and have hundreds, or in some cases, thousands of process steps in the manufacturing process alone. So it really is a very international process. It's not really a global process, because actually there are many countries that play almost no role whatsoever. It's really just a small number of countries, the Netherlands, the US, Japan, Taiwan, and Korea, that play the dominant role in the chip industry. And that gives them and the companies in those countries a position of unique influence.
And Philip, can you talk about how Taiwan and China work on manufacturing semiconductors together?
Well, you know that actually a small chip actually support most of the devices and high-tech products. And seems China's for the past 2 decades have become the world factory, as a matter of fact, that it is indeed for several years to be the major consumption market for the semiconductor. And so particularly on the mature chips, and basically for the electronic devices and computers and cell phones. So that's the reason why the Taiwan's and China's cooperation become deeper and deeper, and with major investment from TSMC to other foundries like UMC, and together with many Taiwanese semiconductor companies have large investment, like in Kunshan, Shanghai, and many area in China.
So, Philip, I'm going to have a follow-up question on this. When you were in the government during President Ma's administration, was there any discussion about, or concern about semiconductor, in some way, whether it's the talents or, moving some parts of the manufacturing to China? Was there any sort of national security concern in that area?
Yes, they were concerned about many Taiwanese technicians that went to China looking for, a better job and to develop an investment from Taiwan, and worry about this so-called whoring out effect. But turned out that actually the chip making is a very complicated, not just from design, fabrication, or packaging and testing. It's a very complicated process, particularly in chip making foundries like the TSMC. Actually, that it's not that easy that you can reproduce the same kind of a production line in China. And for probably 1 or 2, 3 decades, proved that Taiwan can remain as the most advanced chip making industry here in Taiwan.
So on that, some people in Taiwan actually worry that TSMC's recent announcement of the $40 billion investment in Arizona will hollow out Taiwan's semiconductor industry. Tell us, what is the current debate and any validity to those conversations?
So this is another, or so-called new whoring out worries. Indeed, I remember that Secretary of State Blinken mentioned that this concentration of chip making in Taiwan, particularly in the advanced chips made by TSMC, accounted more than 90% of the market, has become already a national security risk for the United States. I think that Secretary Finance of Yellen also, she mentioned that as well. So a lot of people worry about another effect, so-called the de-Taiwanization or 去台湾化. Okay, and that because United States on one hand have tech war, export and product control against China, particularly on the advanced chips and technology equipments. On the other hand, worry about the domestic chip making resilience or the supply chain resilience. And that's the reason why that hoping that from TSMC to Samsung and other factory can invest factories in the United States. And I remember a year ago, Morris Chan mentioned that it's very not reasonable or rational to invest a huge factories in the States. But a year later, that they switched from 12 billion investment to 40 billion investment in Arizona, from 1 factory to 3. So at that moment, some Taiwanese argue that whether this is a new whoring out effect, whether this is so-called de-Taiwanization or 去台湾化, but in terms of, however, this is indeed a worry here, and but I think that TMC, like I said, it's a very complicated process. And production lines invested in the United States is probably account for a small portion of the overall production line of the TSMC. So let's see. And then TSMC, I mean, the new president, 2 presidents of TSMC promised that there's no such thing of so-called whoring out effect.
Chris, what is your view? You actually wrote about Taiwan's dilemma in your book.
Well, I think I agree with the view that Philip laid out. Certainly, there is a desire from multiple different governments. There's the U.S., but also Japan is incentivized TSMC to set up a facility there, and there's discussions underway, according to media reports, between TSMC and Germany and Singapore as well about facilities there. But on the other hand, if you look at where most of TSMC's investment is going today, it's happening still in Taiwan. And when you look at the most advanced technology, that will be rolled out first in Taiwan. So I don't think the evidence is really suggestive of any sort of large-scale de-Taiwanization. And if anything, I think Taiwan is going to play an even more important role in the chip industry in 10 years' time than it does today. That's certainly where companies are betting with both their statements, but also their investment dollars.
Yeah, I think, for those recent sort of government conversations or discussions about semiconductor, we are seeing more of an industrial policy on both, U.S. and Taiwan to a certain extent, as well as on the China side. So, let's look at, China has the Made in China 2025 and the dual circulation strategy. And then on the U.S. side, you have a number of, industrial policies like the CHIPS Act and export controls. So governments are applying a national security lens to technological development. I'm curious how you both think about this approach, and whether, especially the U.S. export controls and in some ways sort of restrictions on, collaborating with China, and the kind of impact it will have on China's own semiconductor development.
Well, I'm happy to try to start answering that question. I think the controls will have a pretty dramatic impact on China's development, and we've already seen the early stages. But if you step back and ask first, why is this happening? Why is it the case that governments are thinking more about the national security implications of semiconductors? It's because when defense planners in all of the world's major countries think about the types of technology they want to buy in 10 years' time or in 20 years' time for their military, they're going to be more reliant than ever before on semiconductors for the digital signal processing, for the sensors capabilities, but also for the artificial intelligence, which is hoped will play a bigger and bigger role in defense systems in the future. And so the question of which country has access to the most advanced computing power is not simply a question relevant for smartphones or for internet companies. It's a militarily relevant question too. And we've seen over the past half century the ways in which computing power has revolutionized warfare, to the extent that which we take it for granted today that a missile can hit its target accurately hundreds of miles away. Well, that was unthinkable 50 years ago, and now it's generally accepted. And so we shouldn't be surprised, I don't think, to see governments trying to control access to the most advanced computing technologies today too, since they always have in the past. So then the next question to ask is, well, can the U.S. succeed in keeping China pretty far behind from what the U.S. and Taiwan and Japan can do today? And I think the answer to that is probably yes, for the reasons that Philip outlined at the start. Semiconductors are very, very hard to produce. The technology is monopolized by just a couple of companies in a couple of countries. And China's really struggled to make substantial progress over the past decade, despite all of the money poured into its industry via Made in China 2025. It's made some progress, but the ratio of progress to dollars spent has been pretty low. And so given that, I think we should expect that the U.S. controls will cause additional problems for China's effort to advance with the most cutting edge semiconductor technologies.
And Philip, what is your view? Have you heard from some of our businesses, especially those with, factories and manufacturing capabilities in China? How do they view this sort of, government involvement? Is that helpful to them or not?
I think that geopolitical factors actually has become one of the major focal point for many multilateral companies here in Taiwan and in the region as well. I mean, they have to, concern more about this non-economic and financial reasons or factors behind the supply chains, particularly in those very high-tech products. I think that technology has become one of the critical hard power element of the hard power, not just the military or economy, particularly for those dual-use technology. But the problem is that in the past, during the Cold War, there was a zero-sum competition between Soviet Union and United States. And so technology control, export control probably can be more effective than we are facing this situation right now. And new technology, most of them probably have military implication or application. And so that's the reason why when you deal with the technology control, that you definitely have to deal with the impact on financial or commercial aspects. So it would be very difficult for a private company to deal with this, to cope with this new geopolitical challenges. So that's the reason why that fund time for TMC as an example, that you can see that a year ago and now they have totally different perspective. And Maurice Chan remark in the open ceremony where President Biden attended, and Maurice Chan said that globalization is almost dead. So that's the reason why I think that he probably suffer or have a deepest impact or on this geopolitical factors on TSMC. Yeah.
I'm going to ask Philip, and this is, for your personal view, how much do you think, and whether do you think the U.S. government has pressured TSMC to invest in Arizona?
I think that's very obvious. It's not just the U.S. government. Also, TSMC sees major clients, like American clients from particular major fabulous foundries, from Intel to Apple. I think that it's very clear that they hope their production line will not be affected by geopolitical risk, particularly across the Taiwan Strait. With what happened in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, and people worried very much that there would be another conflict across the Taiwan Strait, particularly after Nancy Pelosi visit in August and then follow that military exercise, across the Taiwan Strait by the POA. So, geopolitical risk now become the major fact that make the semiconductor production lines worry so much that with so much concentration in Taiwan, probably will hurt U.S. technology or production line resilience. And that's the reason why that we have to adapt, okay? But on same meantime, how to maintain our competitive edge, particularly in terms of strategic advantage. So that's the reason why that it's a challenge for us, not just for TSMC, but for Taiwanese government as well.
Any thoughts on that particular point?
I think that sometimes that it's not decided by us or the TMC, and it's decided by the more broader U.S.-China competition and rivalry. I think that it's unavoidable that the new national security report in October by the Biden administration mentioned that China will be the largest geopolitical challenge for the United States for the upcoming decades. So how to cope with these challenges, I think, and it is said that technology is one of the major elements, and how to be on this technology, the factor be more of as a taking would be better for Taiwan. I think that would be a challenge for Taiwanese government and Taiwanese semiconductor industry as well.
I think in the year of 2023, as Taiwan is leading up to the presidential election in January 2024, this is going to be a major conversation and platform for both the KMTs and DPPs. Chris, I want to turn to you. Your book is for a wide range of audiences interested in business, defense strategy, and geopolitics. What are your own lessons learned from researching and writing this book? And what do you hope the readers will take away from reading this book?
Well, I would say there are three main lessons from the book. The first is that almost everyone who doesn't work in the semiconductor industry has dramatically underestimated the importance of chips in all our lives. And I think the last couple of years with supply chain shortages causing manufacturing delays worldwide have underscored that point. But it's hard for the typical person who never sees the chip to realize just how dependent they are on semiconductors. The second key takeaway for me was the extent to which the chip industry is defined by just a tiny number of companies. We've talked about TSMC in this conversation. We could also talk about ASML, the lithography firm in the Netherlands that produces 100% of the world's most advanced lithography machines. And there are other companies that have similarly strong market shares. And so it's a tiny number of companies that produce the chips that we all rely on. And that unique structure of the industry makes it very different from many other sectors of the economy. The third aspect, I think, as Philip alluded to, is the extent to which we're returning to the origins of the chip industry, in which military concerns played a big role in shaping how the industry developed. The first chips were actually ordered for guidance computers on missiles. That's where the semiconductors emerged from. And we're returning to a period in which military concerns and defense concerns will play a big role in shaping the industry over the coming decade. And I think for a long time, the chip industry, because it sells most of its chips to smartphones and to PCs, kind of forgot about the implications of their technology for military uses. But the past couple of years, the Russia-Ukraine war, for example, have brought this issue back to the forefront. And as military planners in Washington and Beijing and around the world think about ways that they can apply artificial intelligence to military systems, a task that is fundamentally dependent on access to the most advanced chips, we're going to see, I think, more evidence that defense concerns are going to play a role in the structuring of semiconductor supply chains far more so than they have in recent decades.
Well, last question for Chris. With the new Congress, with the Republicans, being in control in the House of Representatives, do you foresee more, I would say, export controls and even more measures coming out of Washington, D.C. when it comes to trying to kneecap China's technology and semiconductor industry?
I think the new Congress is going to be focused on the issue. And there's, given all the evidence of the past couple of years of ways that U.S. technology has flowed into the People's Liberation Army and their development of military technologies, this is an issue that is bipartisan concern in the U.S. But I also think that the export controls that the Biden administration rolled out in October on China's chip industry, they were intended to be pretty comprehensive, and I think not the first of many steps, but rather the big change. They'll be followed, I think, by some smaller tweaking of export controls, but I don't expect another major expansion of export controls on semiconductors. In other spheres like biotech, perhaps so, but in the semiconductor space, I think we've seen the big change in the export controls from last year, and the U.S.'s focus for the next couple of years will be trying to plug any holes that do emerge in that new export control regulation.
Well, thank you. And with that, thank you both for speaking to us today. Chip War is currently being translated into Chinese and will be published by Tianxia in Taiwan in April. More importantly, this book has sparked so many more conversations about what to do with the global supply chain of critical technology, such as semiconductors, when geopolitics is balkanizing the future of global economy. And Taiwan, a country that produces 90% of the most advanced chips, stands right in the middle of the political, economic, and security fight. TVBS Meeting Room will bring to you more experts on this topic later. And thank you for watching, and take care.